Hello, it's nice to see you again. Up until the last session, over a total of 66 episodes, I have explained everything from your child's disability diagnosis to making future plans for a happy life for your child with a disability. Now today, let's return to that important question we asked at the very beginning. The question is, who will take care of my child when I die? This is a question I have been pondering and trying to find answers to ever since 1998, when I first learned that my child was autistic at the age of 3. I don't know how things are now, but up until around the year 2000, there was almost no government support for people with developmental disabilities in Korea. And as a parent, I remember feeling completely lost because I didn't know what preparations to make. So what I started back then was a father's group for parents of children with disabilities at my church and at the school my child attended. Since I didn't know what to do on my own, the idea was for fathers facing the same concerns to come together and try to find some solutions. So at that time, we looked into cases from abroad, such as the United States and Canada, and even reached out to various parent organizations overseas. In this way, parents of children with disabilities, together with churches and schools, joined forces to prepare for the future of children with disabilities after their parents are gone. And in 2008, I participated in the founding of the Dussel Welfare Foundation. After that, in 2010, I immigrated to Canada. However, unless you are a parent of a person with developmental disabilities, this question probably won't feel so urgent and desperate. This is because most organizations for people with developmental disabilities are mainly focused on what kinds of services they will provide. Of course, it is only natural that a variety of services for people with developmental disabilities are needed right now. However, just as important is the question of who will take care of children with disabilities after their parents have passed away, and finding a solution to this is even more difficult. That is why I believe that organizations for people with developmental disabilities should, to some extent, involve the parents of children with disabilities in establishing the direction of the organization. In that sense, Here and Now has ensured that more than 50% of its board members are parents of children with disabilities. Returning to the main topic, today I would like to provide a comprehensive summary of this question. Who will take care of my child and how after I die? To answer this question more clearly and concretely, you should try envisioning the most wonderful week you want for your child with a disability, which is a question asked in the first step of setting a vision. Now let me explain this by connecting it to the 5 elements of a happy life. First, during the weekdays, whether working, volunteering, enjoying hobbies, or attending a day program provided by an institution, it is about living everyday life. This part corresponds to contribution. Second, in the afternoons during the week and on weekends, it is about spending daily life with the people you live with. These people could be family members, home share supporter families, or group home supporters. This corresponds to the aspect of relationships. And to be able to enjoy this everyday life comfortably, it is necessary to prepare both the living environment and the financial resources. Lastly, throughout this entire process, it is important to prepare while taking your child's choices into consideration. In other words, this refers to the relationships your child wants to have, the preferred living environment, the desired weekday and weekend routines, and vacations, among other things. Since every family's situation with their child with a disability is different, I will divide this into several cases for a more detailed explanation. That is, we will categorize based on how much support the child with a disability needs, dividing it into high, medium, and low levels. If the level of needed support is high, it means the degree of disability is considered severe. If it is low, the disability is not severe. And if it is medium, you can think of it as being somewhere in between. Then, for each case, we will look at how to fulfill the 5 elements of a happy life. If we put this into a table, it looks like the following. First, let's look at the case where the level of needed support is high. In terms of relationships, because a high level of support is required, a personal network that can take care of everything in place of the parents after they are gone will be necessary. If there are other family members besides the parents, they will play a central role, and if there are no such family members nearby, someone who can take on that role should be found and prepared in advance. It would be difficult for such a person to be a friend of the parents if they are around the same age as the parents. It will be hard for them to take on that role. So, Among the people, you should look for those who are younger than the parents. But finding such people is not easy. This is especially true for families who have immigrated here to Canada. As an alternative, you can entrust such a role to organizations like Here Now. That is precisely the purpose for which Here Now was established. Another important relationship is with the supporters who live together in a group home, if your child resides in one. Next, when it comes to housing, if your child is going to live in a group home, finding a group home that suits your child well will be a very important factor. This is because both weekday and weekend life take place there. Additionally, depending on the needs, legal arrangements such as granting power of attorney, appointing a guardian, or setting up a trust may be necessary. Permanent power of attorney is probably not easy to obtain since it requires an assessment of intellectual capacity. Lastly, regarding finances, if your child is living in a group home, most expenses such as room and board will be covered by government support. However, in addition to this, there are benefits like the disability support payment. Also, the funds from the RDSP can be used more freely to provide things your child wants. The second case is when the level of assistance needed is moderate. First, in this case, the individual does not qualify for a group home, but at the same time, it would be difficult for them to live independently. So their living arrangement will likely be shared living. As I mentioned in the previous video, shared living comes in two forms: home share, where the person moves into another family's home, and live-in support, where a supporter comes to live in the home of the person with a disability. If possible, having a supporter move into a home that the person with a disability owns or can rent long-term is generally preferred from their perspective, because it minimizes environmental changes when the supporter changes. If the home share arrangement changes, both the house and the supporter change, which can be difficult for the person with a disability. In terms of relationships, the home share provider will usually become the main person involved. And just like in the first case, a personal network is needed to take care of most things after the parents pass away. Also, if they are participating in a CI program provided by an agency, they will form relationships with friends who are also participating, and with the supporters who provide assistance. If it is possible to form relationships with friends to some extent, it would also be possible to create group networking opportunities so that they can enjoy life with their peer group, separate from the CI program. Regarding the third aspect, contribution, they will probably participate in the CI program provided by the agency during the week. Therefore, it is important to carefully choose an agency that suits your child. And depending on your child's situation, in some cases, they may be able to find a job through the employment services provided by the agency. As for the financial aspect, if they do home share, there will be no housing costs. And if they receive living support, there will be no housing costs as long as they own their home without a mortgage loan. If they are renting or have a mortgage loan, then there will be corresponding costs. I explained in detail in the previous video how much money is needed to ensure financial dignity. Legally, if necessary, a permanent power of attorney or authorization of representation is, of course, required. And you will also need to set up a trust. Lastly, the third case is when the level of assistance needed is low. In terms of living arrangements, this could mean living with a friend or living alone. Of course, if someone is able to do everything completely on their own, we wouldn't consider them as having a disability. So here we are assuming cases where some, though not much, assistance is needed. In this case, home sharing or living support is also possible. And since the funding amount is not very large, it may be worth considering having two people with disabilities live together with a supporter. From the perspective of relationships, a personal network that can provide some assistance, such as financial management, will be necessary. However, I believe that if there are siblings, this level of support can be sufficiently managed. If there are no siblings, it will be necessary to have someone prepared who can provide help when needed. This role can also be fulfilled by the trust manager. And I strongly recommend group networking with friends who have similar levels of disability. In addition, since it is possible to gather in groups at churches or religious organizations, attending such gatherings can also provide opportunities to form personal relationships with non-disabled friends. Of course, it may not be easy to form close friendships with so-called typical friends, but There are cases where some of them accept our children with disabilities as friends without reservation. If your situation falls into this case, there are many things you can try in terms of building relationships from the perspective of contribution, or this case also presenting the possibility of employment. So it is important to put in a lot of effort towards securing a job. There will also be people at the workplace with whom relationships can be formed. Additionally, I would also like to recommend looking for various volunteer opportunities. If there is no work during the week, you can participate in CI programs offered by agencies or use individualized funding to engage in activities that your child with a disability enjoys and wants to do. Individualized funding can mainly be used for career development, social skills, and life skills. For example, it can be used for job training to support employment or to learn group networking, music, art, sports, as well as shopping, cooking, using public transportation, and financial management. For legal or financial preparations, I have explained them in detail in previous videos, so please refer to those videos. Now, I have explained all the different cases, so what will happen to my child when I die? Do you see the answer to that question now? In fact, although this question is phrased as after the parents pass away, this is not something that can be prepared after the parents die, but rather it is an environment that must be created in advance while parents are alive. It needs to be arranged while parents still have the capacity to do so. That way, after the parents are gone, the child with a disability can continue living without major difficulties adjusting to changes. Now, let me show you once again the blueprint for a happy life. This illustration is the one I showed in the middle of the 13th episode of the BoTV video. Now that I've finished all the explanations, let's review once more, looking at this illustration, how we can walk together and prepare for a happy life for the child with a disability, a happy life for the family, and peace of mind, from the moment the child is first diagnosed to after the parents have passed away. If you look at this blueprint, the first thing you see at the very bottom is what is called a foundation. I explained the details about this in my YouTube videos from episode 1 to episode 8. Also, regarding the principles and direction, I explained those from episode 9 to episode 13. And from episode 14 to episode 24, I introduced topics related to seeking help among the principles and direction, especially focusing on government support. And from episode 25 to episode 32, I shared my experiences raising my own child, from kindergarten all the way through high school. Then from episode 33 to episode 45, I introduced how to prepare for the transition to adulthood. And from episode 46 to episode 55, I introduced government support and programs provided by Here and Hour for adults with developmental disabilities. Then, from episode 56 to episode 66, I introduced how to make future plans for children with disabilities after their parents pass away. Today, with this 67th episode, we will be wrapping things up overall. Earlier, I tried to show that regardless of the level of support a child with a disability needs, it is possible for them to lead a happy life even after their parents are gone. Above all, I am grateful that here in Vancouver, Canada, these preparations are possible to some extent even if parents do not have a lot of money. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the pioneers, families, and the Canadian government who have made various welfare systems for people with developmental disabilities possible. I hope that such systems will be introduced in Korea as soon as possible. So even if your child has a disability, I hope that parents won't worry too much and will live happily day by day. Of course, it won't be easy and there will be many difficulties and hardships. Still, if you live each day joyfully, won't those days add up to a happy life? To achieve this, as I mentioned at the beginning of the YouTube video, if you can acknowledge your child's disability in a healthy way and steadily do what you can as a parent in each area of daily life, things will work out. It seems that, in many cases, families struggle because they are unable to accept their child's disability. This is often because they try to change what cannot be changed, and in some cases, perhaps because of the parents' own desires. Of course, the goal should be the same, and you should make detailed plans and do your best to achieve them. However, having excessive desires is more likely to make life difficult. So, over the past year and a half, I have uploaded 67 videos guiding you from the initial diagnosis all the way to today's discussion on postparental planning. I sincerely hope that these videos so far have been of at least some help to families raising children with disabilities. In the future, if there are any particularly valuable topics to share, I will make sure to reach out to you again. Thank you for watching until now.